Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Um, we are going to look at solving a polynomial equation in factored form. So basically, we're going to use all of our fun factoring knowledge here to start solving. And we're going to actually continue factoring next week with different fun, exciting ways to factor. But this is just kind of we're adding in the zero product property. So the zero product property basically says if A times B is equal to 0, then either A has to be 0 or B has to be 0. Okay, so if we're solving polynomials in factored form, the way that you want to do that is you basically set each set of parentheses equal to 0, and then you solve for x. So for example, in this first problem, we would take this x minus 3 and set it equal to 0. We would take this x plus 2 and set it equal to 0. And then we would just solve here. So x would be equal to 3, or x would be equal to negative 2. Okay, so these would be my two answers here. Same thing for number 2. Okay, I would have x plus 5 is equal to 0. And since it's squared, I would also have x plus 5 equals 0. So if I solve this, I'm obviously going to get x is equal to negative 5 in both cases here. So you don't need to write that twice. You would just write in your answer x is equal to negative 5. Okay. Number 3, you want to put anything that has an x with it set equal to 0. So see how in number 1 we didn't put like 4 equals 0 because we wouldn't be solving for anything. But in number 3, you would want to do 3x equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, and x plus 8 is equal to 0. And then here we would get x is equal to 0. Here we would get x is equal to 1. And finally, we would get x is equal to negative 8. Okay, so this last one, again, we're setting all of these equal to 0. So 2x plus 1 equals 0, 3x minus 2 equals 0, and then x minus 1 equals 0. So the first one, we would go through and solve this, and we would get x is equal to negative 1/2. Or we would go through and solve the next one. X is equal to 2/3, or x is equal to 1. Okay, so these would be our three answers. All right, so these ones were nice because they were already factored for you. The second part, they're not going to be factored yet. So factoring a polynomial equation and then find the solution. So it says, what if the polynomial equation is not in factored form? How do you solve it? Okay, so the first thing you always have to do is you have to get all your terms on the same side of the equation and then set the equation equal to 0. Okay, so this is probably one of the biggest mistakes people make. They don't set their equation equal to 0. Okay, so make sure you do that first. So for example, in this one, I would first add 7x squared, and I would put this in standard form and have it set equal to 0. So then you want to factor out your GCF if possible. And if not, factor the trinomial or the 4-term polynomial. Okay, and then just like we did above, set each factor equal to 0 and solve for x. Okay, so for this one, I would factor out an x, and I would have x squared plus 7x minus 8. I would continue to factor. So what multiplies to negative 8 and adds to 7? So it would be 8, positive 8, and negative 1. Okay, and then I would set all of my factors equal to 0. So I would have x equals 0, I would have x minus 1 equals 0, x plus 8 equals 0. So I'd have x equals 0, x equals 1, and x equals negative 8. Okay? So for number 5, we're going to go ahead and factor these first. The first thing I'm going to do is look for my GCF after I see that it's already set equal to 0. And then I'm going to be setting my two factors equal to 0. So I know I am going to get x equals 0 and x equals 9. Okay, for number 2, first I'm going to set this equal to 0. So x squared, I'm going to add my x over and add my 10x over, which is going to give me plus 11x on the left-hand side. And then I'm going to add my 10. Okay, and now I'm going to factor this. There's no GCF. So what multiplies to 10 and adds to 11 would be 10 and 1. And now I'm going to set my factors equal to 0 and solve to get x equals negative 10, x equals negative 1. Okay, so who thought you could have had more fun than just factoring? It just keeps getting better. All right, so number 3, again, and feel free at any point if you want to pause this and try one on your own, go for it. Okay, so I'm setting this equal to 0 first, so I get x squared. I'm going to put it in standard form, so minus 2x minus 48. Okay, so now what multiplies to 48? Negative 48. Okay, and adds to negative 2. Okay, so I know that would be 8 and 6. And since I want it to be a negative 2, I would make it negative 8. And remember, you don't have to do this t-chart, but if you want to at some point, like if it helps you out, you can always do that to make sure that you're factoring correctly. So I'm setting my factors equal to 0 and solving to get x equals 8 and x equals negative 6. Okay, so number 4, again, I'm going to put this in standard form. So I'm going to subtract the negative 3x cubed. So I have negative 3x cubed plus 6x squared minus 3x is equal to 0. I'm going to take a GCF out of negative 3x to get x squared minus 2x plus 1. And then I'm going to factor. So what multiplies to positive 1 and adds to negative 2 would be x minus 1, x minus 1. Oopsie, I don't know where this last 1 came from. Okay. So now I'm going to set all of these equal to 0. So negative 3x equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0. And I'm actually just going to do the x minus 1 equals 0 once, because just like we saw above, if it's the same thing, it's obviously just going to be x equals 1, and you don't have to write that out 2 times. Okay, so you would just have x equals 0 and x equals 1. All right. So now we have 4 terms, so we're going to be using grouping. Okay, so this first one is already set equal to 0. I'm going to group it and take out an x squared to get x minus 1 left over. Take out a negative 16 to get x minus 1 left over. So I have x squared minus 16, x minus 1. And now I have dots. Very exciting. Okay, so I'm going to set all 3 of these equal to 0. So x minus 4 equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. X minus 1 equals 0. So I have x is equal to 4. X is equal to negative 4. X is equal to 1. Sometimes you'll see people write this as x is equal to plus minus 4. Okay, and they separate it with like a comma. X is equal to 1. You can also write it like that or keep them all separate. All right, so for number 6 here, again, we're going to group these first. Okay, so first I'm going to take out an x squared and have 2x plus 7. And then I'm going to take out a negative 100 so that I have 2x plus 7. So I have x squared minus 100 and 2x plus 7 is equal to 0. Okay, so I have dots again here. All right, and now I'm just going to set all 3 of these. X plus 10, x minus 10. Okay, so I'm going to set all 3 of these equal to 0. So x plus 10 equals 0, x minus 10 equals 0, 2x plus 7 equals 0. So I'm going to get x equals negative 10, x equals positive 10, and x equals -7/2. All right, so number 7, so these were all set equal to 0 already. Number 7, you obviously have to do that first. So I'm going to subtract the 9x squared and add 9 to both sides. Okay, so I'm going to get x cubed minus 9x squared minus x plus 9. And now I'm going to group these. Okay, take out an x squared to get x minus 9. Take out a -1 to get x minus 9. So I have x squared minus 1, and then x minus 9. And again, I have dots. So x plus 1, x minus 1, x plus, or x minus 9. Okay, so I'm setting all three of these equal to 0. And going to solve for all three of those to get x equals -1, x equals 1, x equals 9. Okay, and again, you could also see it written as like x equals plus minus 1 and then comma 9. So that's just saying the solutions, are the same thing as above. All right, so last one here. Just since there's less stuff on the left-hand side, I'm gonna bring that all over. So I'm gonna subtract 10 and add 2x squared. Okay, so this would give me, and I'm just going to rewrite it in standard form. So -4x cubed, and then -x squared plus 64x and plus 16. Okay, so I'm going to group these again because it has 4 terms. So first I would take out a -4x to get x squared minus, oopsie, not a -4x, sorry. A -x squared to get 4x minus 1 plus 1, okay? And then I would be taking out a 16 to get 4x plus 1. So this one's a little bit tricky because when I write out my factors, I'm actually going to use this one and I'm going to take out a -1 here. Because if I take out a -1, it gives me x squared minus 16. And then, very exciting, I can do dots with that. Okay, so that's why I'm going to take out that -1 there to get x minus 4, x plus 4, and 4x plus 1. Okay, so I'm setting those all equal to 0. The -1, you don't set equal to 0 because there's no x with it, right? So that's not going to give me a solution. Okay, so I'm going to solve to get x equals 4, x equals -4, and x equals -1/4. All right, so some fun, exciting new things for today. And don't worry, there's more types of factoring that we haven't gotten to yet that we will continue with next week. So make sure anything that you had questions on, just star it and we can go over it in the live Teams meeting. All right, I hope everybody's having a good week. Bye.